My presentation is called Library UX 2021 and Beyond. Now, when I was first asked to talk and present, it was the idea that it would be actually in France, in Lille, and it was obviously very exciting. But what I would say is, now that we've had COVID and all the issues around it, I actually think my talk is going to be more relevant today, because I think there's more of an opportunity now that we are living in this world of COVID and we're coming out of it, that what I've got to say is even more relevant than it would have been. So I should say also, this is my little French introduction. Merci de m'avoir invité à vous présenter cette keynote. Je suis très heureux de vous parler aujourd'hui. Just my little bit of French there. I've delivered UX research workshops in Paris and Metz, and yesterday a UX design workshop online. I would have loved to visit Lille in person and do hope to return to France in the future. I didn't know it was going to do that sweep effect all the time. That's new. I always feel that UX work is instinctively understood and welcomed by French library staff. I don't know, something about the empathy, something about the culture, there's something about the French. I feel that you get this work because it's all about experience and understanding. It was wonderful to get so many great contributions yesterday during the UX design workshop, and also the contributions that we received at the UX in Libraries conference back in 2019. So a little bit more about me. I used to be a librarian, so I understand your world. I'm not one of these consultants telling you you're doing it all wrong from a position of not understanding. I do understand. I understand your world. I understand what it is to deliver a library service. I worked in libraries for 20 years, and my last proper job within libraries, a 9-to-5 job, was leading a UX innovation program across all of the libraries at the University of Cambridge. I consult and train in UX globally. Since 2017, I've been a full-time freelance UX consultant and trainer, and I've completed consultancies all over the world. I would have taken over the world by now had it not been for the pandemic. I am passionate about sharing UX knowledge. I created and chair the UX in Libraries conference. Although I initially lost all my work and income due to the pandemic, I'm one of those really annoying people who actually was very, very productive during the pandemic. I actually managed to write an entire book, and it's a big book, I can tell you. A handbook of UX research and design in libraries, which was published earlier this year by UX in Libraries, and it is available from Amazon France. In fact, because of the ridiculous situation in the UK with Brexit, I am very anti-Brexit. It was actually impossible at one stage for us to order copies ourselves without actually ordering them from Amazon France. So that just shows you how ridiculous Brexit is. There you go. That's my bit of politics. Although I will be asking you to take action after today, urging you to utilize UX research and design methods, I recognize that it's been an incredibly tough year. We've been faced with a challenge that has no parallel in peacetime. There's nothing else like it. And for that reason, it's really important that as the world becomes more normal again, we need to continue to be kind to ourselves. And that means looking after ourselves mentally as well as physically. It means looking out for colleagues who might not be coping. It means caring about the experience of each other as much as our users. I'll come back to that point a bit later on, because there's a mental health issue here. However, I do also think we should now be starting to look at the COVID-19 pandemic as an opportunity, as I said at the start. We have now the perfect opportunity to stop and rethink and remodel our processes, our systems, and our services. Services should be refocusing in response to library users' new and changing needs and their new routines, activities, and behaviors. Everything has changed. We should not continue as we were before. We shouldn't expect everything to be the same. We shouldn't be laying the furniture out the same. We shouldn't have our messaging the same. The way we deliver services has got to change on the basis of the world being turned upside down. Some things will go back to normal, other things will not, and we have to be aware of that. UX work, or user experience work, to give it its full name, is all about defining, analysing, and responding to problems. And there have been few more significant problems for libraries than how they might continue to deliver appropriate services to their users in 2021 and beyond. Now, we've done a great job during the pandemic. We've done a great job of trying to just meet these needs as they've come up. We've actually worked in a very innovative, quick way, and that's been fantastic to see in libraries all around the world. However, to use an English word, we've been fudging it. We've been just about getting it right, papering over the cracks. And we need to actually now do research so that we properly deliver services that continue to meet the needs of users. Okay, so I see three possible scenarios for how users will interact with libraries as we start to come out of the pandemic. And I want to just go through these three scenarios with you, and then I want to give you the opportunity for you to vote. There's going to be a poll that Sophie will share with you, to vote on which one you think is the most likely, because I'm really intrigued to find out what you think. So, 1, users choose to principally use the library online because they've got used to it and it's safe and convenient. That's option 1. 2, users choose to visit physical libraries more because they've missed contact with other people and working in different surroundings. Also, they're tired of online, which does not always work as they'd like it to. So that's number 2. And then finally, 3, users take a more hybrid approach than before, more deliberately choosing online or physical, dependent on the task or the circumstance. So 1, more online. 2, they come back to the physical libraries. And 3, they take more of a hybrid, deliberate approach, more deliberately choosing online or physical. Okay. So we're now going to vote on that. So there will be a poll. I think if you look under sondage, yeah. So I guess we'll get the results of that poll a bit later. Have you all voted? Okay. So I'm going to move on. The third option, I hope you've already voted, because I'm going to tell you what my option is, and that is number 3, the hybrid option. I think people will be more intentional and deliberate in approach. I'm calling it my theory of intentionality. La théorie d'intentionnalité, perhaps. The idea that people will be more intentional and deliberate in their approach. They'll do things more specifically based on what they have to achieve, rather than just casually doing stuff because they've always done it that way. Although I think initially people will come back to libraries just because they've missed them. But I think it was more accidental or chaotic before in people's routines. They weren't so definite about why they were using the physical library or why they were going online. Now they have behaviors learned during COVID. They will know what works for them online and what does not work for them online. So they will have learned that, and that behavior will influence how they use libraries in the future. They will set certain tasks aside for the physical library and other tasks for the digital library. Libraries have offered hybrid services for many years, but users will now take a more hybrid approach. More people will use both. But that is just a theory. It is pure guesswork on my part. And UX is never about guessing. It's always about gathering evidence and testing. That's why I love it. For so many years, I was sat in meetings with other library staff where everyone was just guessing what to do. Oh, let's do this. Oh, I think this. Oh, let's try this now. It was all just coming out of library staff heads. And this is why I'm so passionate about UX, because it's actually evidence-based, and it's about talking to our users and watching our users and understanding what they actually need, rather than using guesswork. As UX pioneer Don Norman said, you have to know your user. And that's for any service. You have to know them. And I felt working in libraries for many years that people really didn't know their users. In fact, some people kept their users at arm's length. Some libraries did not want to know their users. You cannot plan or design services effectively without detailed knowledge of user needs and behaviors. They cannot be user-centric if you do not understand those needs and behaviors. Yes, you cannot deliver user-centered services without understanding user experience. So all of that guesswork about those options, it's immaterial. We need to find out. Quite understandably, UX work has not been a priority during the pandemic. I completely understand that and see that. Library staff have just been trying to keep their services running, of course. We might have learned a few things about user behavior through observation or online correspondence, but we now need to find out so much more and focus our attention on the problems that users alert us to, rather than what we consider to be the priorities. So our priorities, let's forget them. Let's see what their priorities are. We should be refocusing around that. We need to find out what is not working for our users. What are their frustrations? Where does the library need to focus its attention? And it's probably not in the places where we expect. And how does the library fit into their routines and lives now? Because those routines, those lives have changed. And it's essential, therefore, that we use UX methods that go beyond traditional research methods to find out how users are really experiencing services. We shouldn't be using surveys because they're only a small percentage of users who respond to them. Responses are often superficial and unreliable, and they only tend to tell you what people say or think they need and what they say they do, not what they actually need and do. They're all problems as to why we shouldn't be using surveys. We use surveys far too much. And then you've got statistics. They're open to misinterpretation, sometimes deliberately, and misuse. They tell you that someone has used something. Perhaps they visited the library, they took a book out, they used a database, but it doesn't tell you anything about how good or bad that experience was. They don't involve user interaction. In fact, there's zero user interaction. This is why I'm always saying we need to move beyond these methods, because they don't tell us enough. UX research techniques, on the other hand, are more creative, they're more active, they're more evidence-based, they're detailed, and they're user-focused. There's so much detail in there. I mean, if you gave me another half hour, I would explain why in great detail. I don't have that time, but I'm so passionate about why these methods work. And it's because they're so much more engaging and detailed and nuanced. They ensure you gather invaluable data on user needs and behaviors. These are some of the methods I would suggest you prioritize. Interviews in person or via Zoom. I've known loads of libraries now are starting to use interviews to actually Zoom and have interviews with students. It's a great thing to do. Usability testing of digital platforms, either in person or remotely. Observation and behavioral mapping of how users move in library spaces and layouts, and how that's going to change if you change your layout. So little maps to show where people move in your library. User journey mapping to understand processes and obstacles during tasks. How do people achieve certain tasks and what obstacles are in their way? Maybe it's a form that doesn't make sense. Maybe it's something they can't log into. Maybe it's some information that is complicated. And finally, I would recommend cultural probes to understand study routines and research behaviors. These are little packs of information completed at a distance by users. They're asked to draw their experience, to take photographs of things that are part of their information routine, to keep diaries, and to write letters. They're a wonderful technique that I really encourage you to use at this time. All of these methods will really reveal so much about how people are using your libraries, whether they're digital or in physical form. UX research is important. And I've just said why, but it's only the start of the process. After research should come UX design. And UX design is all of these things. Data analysis, sorting and analyzing your user data to identify the key problems and concentrations. Ideation, generating ideas in response to your data for new or modified services. Prototyping, devising and testing service prototypes with users that are iterated and developed and revised in response to how they are used. My main message yesterday was that we tend to stop after research. We love doing research, librarians. We love it, and then we don't do enough with it. We either form a committee or we write a report. We need to go beyond that. We need to analyze the data properly and then know when to stop analyzing the data and actually take action. That's another problem we have. So we then go on and we generate ideas, and then we actually build inexpensive prototypes to test in our libraries. Some university commentators are still saying that everything now needs to go digital and that going digital will solve all of our problems. Well, I disagree. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it is this, that we humans tire of online interaction and remote working far quicker than was previously imagined. I know myself, I had a consultancy with the Library of Parliament in Canada, and I got so exhausted during that 2-month consultancy just because I was online all the time. We tire so quickly of online interaction, and we must be realistic about that. We can't make everything online, and lots of people will not function if everything has to be online all the time, including us as library staff. There's a lot of talk about creating dynamic, collaborative online spaces and virtual communities for students, and they sound great on paper, but I don't see it happening anywhere successfully yet. Of course, digital innovation is important, and there's some things that we can make better by digital, but I don't see it as a complete solution. Some things work better online and others work better in person. And if we've learned nothing else, it's that we need that contact. During the pandemic, we've had no choice but to operate remotely. And this has had some serious consequences. And I don't think we know the full extent of those consequences yet. For some people, being online is catastrophic for the way they work. For some people, it's a disaster. I know from the research I've conducted that many people need the discipline of being in the library to work successfully. They need to be surrounded by other people who are also studying. They may come to the library for social reasons. They engage with staff in the library for support that goes beyond books and data. The stories we hear, the things we hear from library users as staff would surprise other members of the university, the sort of support that we give that is more pastoral and caring. I dread to think what the true picture of student productivity and mental health might be. I think it's going to be very bad, and we'll get news of this coming through. Certain people just cannot work online. Paul Bloom said, "Humans are social beings and we are happier and better when connected to others." It's really hard to disagree with that. It really is. I was watching the Eurovision second semi-final last night, and seeing all those people together enjoying themselves was a beautiful thing. Good luck on Saturday for France. I think it's got a good chance. University life is, of course, about community and camaraderie as much as it is about education and learning. And at most of the 100+ universities I've visited since I started freelancing, the library is situated at the heart of the student community. And when I say situated, I don't just mean physically. I mean, it's actually in the heart of people. People know this is the place to come, to get sustenance, to get support, that it's the lifeblood of the university. And I don't think that's going to change. I believe that students will return to physical library spaces and that they will remain vital. They will stay important. However, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't be modifying our spaces. We will need to modify our physical spaces. They must meet the changing needs of students today. And also, we're still coming out of COVID, so we still need to deal with this situation of distancing. And also, I hate to say it, but another pandemic is likely, so we should plan for that. Some possible changes to physical libraries in the future. Again, guesswork, we need to research. More single study spaces and more flexible furniture. Prioritizing study space over collection space. Wider walkways. Improved ventilation. More contactless transactions and contactless self-service. More outside library areas, library gardens, library study spaces that can be outside, maybe in the cover. Click and collect services, scan and deliver services, and smaller service desks. These are all things that I think we should be exploring, investigating. But this all needs to be researched and crucially prototyped cheaply and tested. I also just want to briefly say something about supporting teaching and research. UX research data gathered from faculty and researchers should also be used to inform developments in how library staff should support teaching and research going forwards. I think we should be looking at embedding librarians in the flow of teaching and research work. Though we should be looking at how we support online course delivery a bit more, how we can help faculty and researchers to identify research materials, how we can offer more copyright support as things will be more online. And also the fact that we should be lobbying and advocating for open research and open data and open educational resources so that we have more accessible materials for our users. I also think there's an important piece of UX research work to be done to explore the impact on library staff of more remote and online working. So I'm talking about mental health, job satisfaction, work-life balance. However, our library users should be the first priority. We should restart our UX research and design work with them. Okay, so I'm almost at the end of my presentation. I'd like to finish by saying that I think the pandemic has changed everything. And this is why there's never been a more appropriate time to research the experiences and routines of library users. We should not rely on how things have been or focus on how we want things to be, but instead on the new and changing behaviors and needs of the people that we support. Le moment est venu. Merci d'avoir suivi ma présentation. That's everything I had to say. So I believe we'll have some time for some questions.
Andy, thank you so much for this inspiring keynote, and especially thank you for reminding us that digital will probably not replace the physical place. As a start, a question not directly related to UX, excuse me. In France, since the beginning of the COVID crisis, academic libraries have been completely closed to the public only from March to May 2020. And since then, we always have been able to open in one way or another, depending on the period, sometimes simply for a click and collect service, sometimes in an almost normal way, but with half capacity and with the closure of some collaborative spaces such as group work rooms, and sometimes, very often this year, with the reservation system. Do you know how academic libraries in England have been facing this period? Have they been more or less open than French libraries, and with as many adaptations according to the government instructions? Do you have any thing to tell us about that? Je demande à Andy quelles ont été en fait les conditions d'ouverture ou de fermeture ou d'adaptation des bibliothèques en Grande-Bretagne par rapport au contexte français que vous connaissez.
Yeah, I think the libraries were the last on the list of things that were considered. So certainly in university community, there was a lot of unhappiness and unrest because for a long time we were still remaining open, and we're like, well, this is crazy. It's just because we've been forgotten about, and that we need to actually do something here. And I think initially that it was very slow to get to a position where people realized it was a danger to library staff. After that, I think from about the time you say from the summer, most libraries reopened in one form or another with limited staff members, and also changed layouts. But there was still a feeling that there was not an understanding as to how difficult that was, and how stressful that was for library staff particularly. I think there was a lack of awareness, a lack of consideration of people's mental health. But yeah, I think, obviously they're starting to open up more now, but yeah, it's been hugely difficult.
Well, just before taking the questions that are being given by our participants, I'll just tell you the results of our poll, which are very different from what you said, because the option 3 was chosen only by 4% of our participants.
Wow. Okay.
The second one by 20%, and the great majority of respondents are confident that users will take a more hybrid approach than before, with 76% of
staying online.
Staying online.
Wow, but interesting. Yeah. Well, as I said, this needs to be researched. This is me guessing. Yeah.
But here about the questions by participants. The first one is, could you tell us a bit more of how we can support teachers and the role you would advise us to play with their online courses and so on?
So it's really just a fact that there's so much expertise within library staff to support faculty and researchers that's kind of untapped. And I think we have more expertise than people realize in terms of the materials that are available, the e-platforms that should be used. And it's just a question of getting that right. But I think in order to get that right, we need to do UX research on faculty and researchers, on their workflows, on what would help them. We need to interview them. We need to understand their needs and how we can interact with their workflow so that we can become a part of that, rather than us just separately trying to sort stuff out and try to do it and then badger them with emails, which is what we do. We keep sending emails, oh, we can do this, we can help you, and that's not going to work. We need to engage with them collaboratively and have not discussions. I think we actually need to research to find out what their needs are better. I don't think we research faculty enough to understand the pressures on their time and their issues. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Andy and Andre, just 1 second. Andy, I put you in the chat the results of the survey because there was a misread. So the results are those. And so I think it's in the same way that you told us in your presentation. I don't know if you see in the chat tout le monde, chat tout le monde, the results. Sorry.
All right. Okay.
I'll let you continue.
Okay. I feel vindicated. Yes, the third approach, the more hybrid. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay.
So we'll go back to the second question. Do you have any clues on how we could better investigate online user experience apart from usability tests?
Yeah. So I think there's this curious thing that when we think we need to do online UX research, that we have to do it digitally. And this is not right. And I think people are always saying this to me, oh, well, there's usability testing. It's like, yeah, but to understand online experience, you can still use all of these in-person techniques. You can still do interviews. You can still get people to keep diaries. They could be online diaries. They could be physical. So things like cultural probes, they're still important. These physical ways of understanding people's online experience. And my experience is as well that students love to actually spend time reflecting about their online experience through interviews and through reflective writing, through diaries, through things that they're not used to doing anymore, because it's novel. Yeah, so those techniques, particularly interview, being the most important to actually understand what they're actually doing now. There are some, I mean, in my book, I talk about various apps you can use to actually understand people's routines. So there's I'll use one name, it's called D-Scout, and that is an app which you can use to get students to record their study experience. So they can say, well, I'm in the library now, or now I'm using something online, and they take photographs, they reflect on their experience, and it's all in this app. And as the researcher, you get fed this information about what they're doing. So with a sample of like 10 to 20 students, you can understand what their routine is during a week. So that's the sort of online approach you can use. Having said that, I do think that you can't get better than meeting people in person and understanding what their experience is and then getting the chance to explain that to you. Yes.
A question. Can you explain the cultural probes notion? Someone didn't understand it.
That's okay. Yeah. So cultural probes, they were actually invented in Italy, not in the so that's just an interesting side fact. You give someone a pack of material, and it's kind of like a mission. Will you accept this mission? Will you complete all these materials in the next 2 weeks? So you give them 2 weeks, and every day they open, or every other day they open an envelope of material, and in that day it gives them a task. The task might be to go and visit a library. It might be to write a diary entry about how they feel about a particular digital platform. They might be asked to draw a picture of how they feel about the library, or they might be asked to write a letter as to why they're breaking up from the library. So on each, every other day for 2 weeks, they produce these artifacts. And at the end of the 2 weeks, they come back to the researcher and say, yep, here it is, here's my material, this is all the work I've done, this is all the information about my experience. And then there's a long interview with the researcher in which they try to understand their choices, their routines, and all of that information goes forward as data into a UX design process. So it's just a really lovely way of doing a sort of a dive into the user's world and understanding their experience. But it's a collection of different techniques, and there's a whole chapter on it in the book.
Another question, do you think every organization is ready to walk on the UX road, even if the staff were not used to these methods before the pandemic?
I think there's a danger that it's seen as trendy, as we would say in England, jumping on the bandwagon, as something that we kind of like, oh, it's just UX. But I think as long as people understand that it's about users, then yes, it should be embraced and it will be embraced. I think there's a problem with saying UX too much. We should stop saying UX and we should just talk about researching our users and understanding our users, because we can all get on board with that. We all know that's a good thing to do. So I think there's a problem with the terminology, and I've got to use it so people understand, yeah, he's that UX guy. But I think there's a danger when organizations overuse UX, and some library staff are like, oh God, I'm fed up of hearing about UX now. So, I think it's important to introduce it as the term and understand that that's a term that means user experience, and that we should talk about our users more and researching them, if that makes sense.
And they're a very pragmatic pragmatic question: how to conciliate the development of relaxation areas with specific furniture and the preparation of a new pandemic?
Okay, yeah. The new pandemic. This is quite negative, isn't it? Through research, you can't guess this stuff. So you need to set a layout out, research how it's used. But obviously, in a pandemic situation, a relaxation area is going to be more distanced. It's going to be less collegiate, less social. That's just a practical, obvious thing. But I can't tell you what that should look like or what will work, because it's specific to those users in that library. And user experience research is all about understanding those users in that library. And that'll be different in different libraries in France, just as much as it would be anywhere in the world. So you have to do the research.
We have a question from someone working in an academic library. I see that students come to the library and I see them every day. I would like to interact with them in an offhand way, but it's hard to find opportunities. I'm worried I might be intruding. How important is this interaction when it comes to UX research?
This is a really good question. Thank you so much for that question. Not that the other ones haven't been good as well, but I like this one particularly because I think it's a problem that we all have. Because I was a library staff member for 20 years and I used to worry about intruding. I used to, oh God, they don't want to listen to me. They want to get on with their work. My experience for the last 5 years has been that 90% of people want to share their story. They want to talk about themselves. And I think we get too much in our heads about this and we shouldn't worry. If someone doesn't want to tell you, they can just say no, and that's fine. Most people are really happy to explain how they work and the things that are important to them. And most people are actually grateful. So I think we've got to get over this obstacle which is in our minds and actually go ahead and research with people. And honestly, people are very willing to do that, more willing than you'd imagine. So this is something I think it's a personal barrier that we need to get over. And it's something I had to get over as well, because I was nervous to begin with. I mean, now I'll go up to anyone and, you know, get loads of information, but you have to get over that and don't worry about intruding. Just go out and ask them. They'll be grateful. I would also say it's really important that you tell them why you're doing it when you're talking to them. If they understand the why, then they will be more on board. So if you say, I just want to ask you a few questions because we're trying to make the service better for you, we're trying to improve this thing, then that really helps with the start of a research interview.
And then there is a question regarding the very exciting book you recently published. Is it meant to become available online for libraries?
It is available on several ebook platforms. And I can't remember the details right now because I'm doing this. But if you go to the UXLib.org website, it tells you what ebook platforms have it. I think there's at least 2, possibly 3 vendors that offer it. Yeah.
Great.
And I think you can even buy it from UX and Libraries direct, but there are several different options.
And here is just a comment, agreeing with you, things won't be the same as before. So many people need to go back to some routines, but I'm not sure they would accept new methods at work.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of work to do to convince people that you need to do this research. Yeah, so I know it's not going to be easy, but you need to advocate for that.
And finally, the last question from one of our participants. You spoke about embedding libraries. I've never heard about this expression, but could you tell us a bit more?
Oh, embedded librarians. This is the idea that you're embedding library staff in the research process. So rather than just have them, delivering library services as a separate entity, actually transplanting librarians into a research scenario. So maybe they're working directly with people who are researchers, and they're kind of almost like research assistants, but because they're librarians, they've got so much knowledge and they can help in that way. So this is, there was an embedded librarians project that we tried at Cambridge, a UX project, and we actually had library staff situated in different research teams throughout the university to see how we could be more helpful if we were sort of at the research coalface, if that makes sense. So more directly involved with researchers. Yeah.
And then there was a question about an app you mentioned, which authorizes us to evaluate the digital experience of users.
Yeah.
And the person asks the name of the app because it wasn't very clear for her.
D Scout. So the letter D and then the word Scout. But that's just one app. There's lots of apps that do this now, and I should say I've got no affiliation with them. You know, so yeah.
And finally, a last question I could ask: have you noticed new trends in the usage of UX design during the COVID period?
No, absolutely not. It's kind of like, oh no, it's died. No, it's people are starting to ask me questions. I think just on the basis of how much work I've suddenly got, I can see that things are opening up, and you know, the fact that I'll be working in Stockholm for 12 weeks at the end of the year, and the fact that people are starting to ask me to do more training. I think people are starting to see, oh right, we can't just go back to the way it was. We need to do some research. We need to get to grips with these methods. So yeah.